Hey everyone, today I want to speak about Micheál Martin, who gave an interview on RTE with Claire Byrne today. Of course, Claire Byrne is a member of the 1%, and of course RTE have been in receipt of over 725 million over the next 3 years for pushing the government's narrative. Now this is important because they're a so-called public service broadcaster, but we all know they're far from independent. So let me know in the comments what you think of RTE. But let's go into this interview that he gave today, and let's cut through a bit of the nonsense that he was talking about. First of all, he spoke about his response to Trump's pause on tariffs. Now he said that this was a case in point proven by their diplomacy in terms of not overreacting. Micheál Martin, the able lapdog for Brussels, went on to his meeting in Brussels and he agreed to the countermeasures, of course, which possibly could be put on pause now until they get down to the negotiating table with their trade commissioner. Of course, the competency for trade relies on the European Commission. And of course, this was Ursula von der Leyen's plan in terms of these countermeasures. And of course, he was fully signed up to them, Micheál Martin. No question asked about that. And he said that the globalisation agenda should essentially continue during this interview. Now, this is important because Micheál Martin is doubling down on the interdependence and interconnectivity of many countries around the world. He spoke about what was happening geopolitically in China. And of course, we know that the US are pivoting towards China, and the US, again, have really exerted their dominance over European Union, in particular here in Ireland, because he was also asked about the pharmaceutical companies. And he said there would be a pause on any new investment in pharmaceutical companies. But he also said that the pharmaceutical companies want certainty. And of course, we're in uncharted waters, according to Micheál Martin. And what certainty they need is to break down barriers amongst all the member states to get more of their big pharmaceutical drugs into those markets. So they're looking for their quid pro quo in relation to Trump's pausing of the tariffs. Now we all know, because of a lot of issues happening in terms of the bond markets and the cost of US debt was going up, was a big consideration in Trump's move in the last number of days. And of course, we've seen Trump still pushing ahead with the 10% tariffs across the European Union. Now also, Micheál Martin went on to speak about issues around the cost of living supports. Now this is interesting because he said he was ruling out any cost of living supports for ordinary people in the forthcoming budget. He said no, there would be no cost of living supports. And at the same breath, he said, well, we have to look at supports for big businesses. And perhaps we've been speaking with the Irish Business Employers Confederation, surprise, surprise, around supports for big businesses. And he spoke about the pay-related social benefit change in terms of people who've lost their jobs or could lose their jobs, that they won't be going on to the lower rate. They would be going in relation to what their income is, with a maximum of €450 per week. Now, of course, Micheál Martin is an able friend of big business because of his discussions and meetings with the Director of Influence and Lobbying, Fergal O'Brien of IBEC, on numerous occasions. 460 lobbying registers were made from the Irish Business Employers Confederation in the past year. And of course, Micheál Martin met them in advance of his scripting of the programme for government. So of course, it's going to be loads of supports for big business and subsidisation for big business. He also spoke about the meeting he had with Trump in the White House, and he said that they achieved their objectives from that engagement. What was their objectives? I'm sure nobody knows in their right mind what the objectives was of Micheál Martin's visit. He said there was no point to push back, and he said during that period and that meeting in the White House, where he sat there like a scolded schoolboy, he said you have to pick your battles. Isn't that interesting, Micheál Martin? He's just a complete coward, to be honest, Micheál Martin as well, and just a complete and utter fool that he could absolutely think he can represent the people of Ireland rather than standing up for our national and domestic interests here in Ireland. But of course, he's more interested in playing the big guy when he goes across Washington DC and travels to those European Union meetings. Dictator Micheál himself. And of course, he spoke about the Children's Hospital Ireland, or Children's Health Ireland report that I spoke about in the video yesterday. You can add a link to that. There's a link in the comments to that video as well if you want to have a look at it. And regarding the disgraceful treatment of the children in terms of waiting for spinal surgery with scoliosis as well, he said there was no point in having an inquiry because inquiries don't yield anything. He said, well, that's right, Micheál, because Micheál Martin has gone into bed with Michael Lowry and of course the RTE tribunal. Where's the criminal sanction? Where's the accountability? It doesn't really happen in Irish society. €500,000, or €500,000,000 rather, he said, has been spent on these tribunals over the past probably 2 decades, and he said, what results have they yielded? Well, I agree with Micheál Martin on that, because they've yielded next to no results. Of course, they've been ably facilitated by the political classes in terms of covering up. We've seen the myriad of inquiries and scandals, such as the banking inquiry. Who was held to task for the banking inquiry? Of course, many of those politicians went off, such as Byrne, went off on their massive pensions, all at our expense, and now they're being rehabilitated by the national media. But of course, Micheál Martin doesn't want to talk about any public inquiries, and we're going to be expecting one now on the COVID in terms of the impacts of lockdowns. But of course, that's going to be yet another whitewash, which is for consideration. But again, it just shows you the scant disregard for those parents and families that have gone through all of this horrific treatment by the hospital system in Ireland over the past number of years, and many more people who are suffering also as well. He went on to speak about housing. He never mentioned anything about homelessness, which isn't really surprising because it's not on the radar for this government. They don't care about the 40 people that died in the streets of Dublin last year. They don't care about the people that are forced into emergency accommodation. They don't care about the record evictions, record rents. He spoke about turning the corner. He had turned the corner. Micheál Martin has turned the corner in housing. This guy is complete nonsense. Unchallenged, he went again by Claire Byrne on this. And he said the focus now is getting more private sector investment in, because they need to maybe look at scrapping the rent pressure zones. He didn't say scrapping the rent pressure zones, but this is what they're going to do, because I've seen the 3 plans for the rent pressure zones, and it is involving scrapping the rent pressure zones, increasing either the rents or linking them to new tenancies, for instance, to keep rents high. And he said the market needs certainty, and the private investors want certainty. So over the next 10-year period. So this is Micheál Martin's approach. There's no certainty for ordinary people who are facing homelessness, no certainty for people who are forced into immigration. There's no certainty for people who are forced into so-called emergency accommodation for years and years and years. There's no certainty for people trying to put food on the table. There's no certainty for people who are struggling day to day. But of course, Micheál Martin isn't interested in people who are struggling, the people who are struggling at the sharpest end of society. Micheál Martin's more interested in bowing down to Ursula von der Leyen in Brussels, Donald Trump in Washington DC, and many of his globalist bosses, rather than serving the interests of the people here nationally that he was supposedly elected to represent. And only 1 in 5 who voted for Fianna Fáil, which was essentially next to no mandate to govern the people of Ireland. But of course, this is the way the political system is set up in Irish society, with their able lapdogs in RTE, giving them nice soft interviews and no hard questions, as Claire Byrne rides off this weekend on her big salary and is a member of the 1% in Irish society. And of course, the RTE board would be all very happy with this, to push this out across the masses of the people of Ireland. So let's cut through the nonsense and let's cut through the spin to what they're pushing out there. Please share my videos. Please press subscribe also, and also please continue to comment on my videos as well, because it's very important to get the real news out to what's going on and cut through the nonsense and call the truth to what's really happening in Irish society behind the spin and propaganda that's pushed through the so-called public service broadcaster. Thanks a lot for the support, and from Dublin, Slán. Take care.